This video will contain spoilers for a class from Chapter 6, though I'm not sure why you'd click on this video if you don't have the class. Seraph is an interesting class that feels like the prime glass cannon. Many of its attacks deal damage to itself, but also allow it to deal some incredible amounts of damage, and at max potential, even the highest damage in the game. Now, being able to do that would be very unsafe and have you dying very often, but the point is the class is very, very strong, and can easily be one of your best options in chain attacks as well because of the high damage output. Also, I feel like this is barely a spoiler just because of how obvious the silhouette is in the menu. I mean, come on. Regardless, in this video, I want to talk about the Seraph class, discuss all of its strengths and weaknesses, and showcase how to use it most effectively. As always, if you enjoyed these guides, please be sure to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out so much. Let's get into it. So I know I said I would do every single one of these class guides on the character that is the inheritor or the S rank for the class, but I'm doing Seraph on Noah because he was already basically set up how I wanted and I am very lazy. That being said, he also has really high attacks, so he's one of the better options for the class anyway, and pretty good dexterity. One of the most interesting features of the Seraph class is that one of its major class skills is called Beast Mode. This will grant Awakening when damage taken exceeds 25% of max HP. This is one of the only natural ways you can actually gain Awakening. This and the Guardian Commander Talent Art are the only real things that even have this effect, and this allows you to have reduced art cooldowns and allow your arts to do about 40 to 60% more damage, somewhere in that range. It's a really strong effect, and it's really, really nice to have on a kit that's all about dealing as much damage as possible. That said, the negative is that you have to take a bunch of damage in order to activate it. That's not really a big deal and can happen pretty often with how the setup of this class works. Got the Guts will boost damage dealt by 100% when your health is lower than 85%. This is also really, really easy to get the effect for with this class because a lot of your arts will do damage to yourself, which is really, really useful. And that damage you deal to yourself can also activate Awakening itself. You don't actually have to get hit by an enemy or take more than 25% of your health at once. You can take it a little bit more gradually. That also means you can activate Awakening in chain attacks, and you can get the skill in chain attacks relatively easily as well, allowing you to get a 100% damage boost and Awakening at the same time, and do a ton of damage. It's really, really nice and really powerful. Greatest Warrior will boost damage by 35% for every enemy in battle. This is probably the weakest skill overall because most super bosses and story enemies and all unique monsters, they're normally only single enemies that you don't have a lot of enemies in combat to get this extra bonus effect. But for the rare multi-enemy fights, this is still a pretty solid skill. It can allow you to do a lot of damage really quickly. And it's also a pretty good tool just for focusing down a specific target really, really quickly in multi-enemy fights. Universal Annihilation boosts damage to toppled and launched enemies by 150%. This is another really large damage boost and really easy to get because of how easy it is to topple and launch enemies, and it's particularly helpful against launch enemies since launch already has an automatic damage boost applied to it, and you can freeze launch and chain attacks to get some absolutely massive damage with this class. Because of how much aggro this class generates and how much damage it deals, I like running Covert Attack to reduce aggro generation, and combine this with a gem effect to allow myself to basically never actually take aggro in fights, which can be extremely useful just so you can deal a ton of damage very, very quickly to enemies, and never have to worry about the enemies targeting you and killing you, allowing you to keep your Awakening effect and not worry about how squishy you're going to be because you constantly deal damage to yourself. Critical Strike is an independent multiplier that'll multiply with all of your additive bonus effects that you have on class skills, and Awakening, which is another independent multiplier, allowing you to get a ton of extra damage on critical hits, which is very, very nice. As you can see, I have a 42% critical hit rate with this class, which is going to allow me to do a lot of damage in many situations. Ultimate Qigong will allow me to ignore 50% of enemies' physical defense when landing a hit. This is a slightly misleading description. It actually reduces enemy physical defense by 50 percentage points, allowing you to do some absolutely massive damage with all of your physical attacks, which I think is extremely useful because this is a really strong physical class and is another effectively independent multiplier just from reducing enemy defense. So, with all these skills combined, you can hit some absolutely massive damage numbers even on your arts outside of chain attacks, and in chain attacks, this can be one of the classes that can easily hit damage cap with the right setup. Now, I am running a bit of safety with Covert Attack. You could run even more damage if you wanted to, but it is a little bit risky. For arts, I am running Flame Lord. This is a very standard positional effect to charge up the talent gauge. This will allow me to use my talent art more often, and it's also a pretty strong art in general. A 250% power multiplier on a pretty low recharge gauge of 4, and another damage boost of 100% when you attack from the front, which is really, really easy to do. Dragon Snarl has a recharge gauge of 3, which is really fast, and a 210% power multiplier, and when you use the art, it will reduce your HP by 10% of your current HP and grants a high critical hit rate. Now, this is not a bad art, but the other arts I am running I just find to be a lot better just for doing as much damage as possible. The quick recharge gauge can be pretty nice, and it can reduce your health a little bit faster if you want to reach Awakening thresholds even faster, so it's a decent art overall. Crimson Lance is a topple art. You would run this if you want to topple the enemy. However, it has a pretty long recharge gauge, and I don't think the benefit is that worth it when you can run topple on other characters and just focus on doing as much damage as possible yourself. But regardless, topple does lead to launch, which also allows you to do a bunch of extra damage to enemies because of one of your class skills, so it can definitely be worth running if you need a topple effect. Now that said, I'm running a different positional to charge up my talent gauge on my Master Art selection, so I don't think this is the most necessary skill because of that, since I have other topples in the party. Inferno Dance is the most powerful art you have access to, and one of the most powerful non-soul hacker arts in the entire game. The second most powerful one, in fact. It has a recharge gauge of 5, which isn't even that much. It can inflict the Blaze debuff, which will be a nice bonus damage over time effect if it actually works, and it also reduces your health when you use it by 10%. I think this should be ran at all times just because of how absurdly powerful it is and just how incredible the art is overall. It's also an AoE attack, so that's also nice as well, allowing you to do damage to multiple enemies if you need to, and overall this should pretty much be a no-brainer art to run in all situations. I already talked about Flame Lord, and now we have Leveling Fire. This is a stance art that boosts damage dealt by another 50% but reduces HP when using arts, which is actually a good thing because it allows you to hit Awakening more often, which allows you to do even more damage with your arts, and you get a nice damage boost on top of that with the stance. I think this is a great skill to run in a lot of situations, even with a recharge gauge of 9. You can pretty much have infinite uptime with it because it's an Agnes class, so you can get it from cancels, and 9 as a recharge gauge is not much at all. I think this is definitely worth running at really good art. Empyrean Salvo is the talent art for the class. This has a recharge gauge of 3, which isn't too bad at all. It also inflicts the Blaze debuff effect, which can be really useful to do a bunch of extra damage over time to enemies, and it will boost damage even further by 100% when you are awakened, which is not very hard to do with this class. This is a great talent art just for a lot of extra damage, and is pretty much worth using in a lot of situations, although if you're running Noah, you might want Unlimited Sword instead, just because of how powerful Unlimited Sword is. For my Master Arts, I'm running Quick Draw just as my other positional art. This is also damage from the front, so it pairs well as a fusion art with Flame Lord. Even though it's ether-based, I'm not getting the full benefit of the damage penetration I have. It's still pretty nice in general because of the very fast recharge gauge of 11 seconds, allowing you to use it really often, and the fact you evade attacks with it, so you get a lot of benefit out of just using it to allow yourself to evade attacks if you somehow do get aggro, or put yourself in a bad situation, or just need to avoid an AoE attack that you can't avoid just by not having aggro. Cross Impact is the very standard art that I have on Agnes-based attacker classes. This gives you Power Charge. Power Charge increases the damage of your next art by about 50 to 100%, depending on the buff strength, which I think is really, really strong, because just being able to do a bunch of extra damage as another independent multiplier is really nice. It works with chain attacks, it works on all of your arts in general, your talent art, and on fusion arts, and can make Inferno Dance hit like 800,000 and 1 million damage, even outside of chain attacks, which I think is really good. Hidden Thorn pairs particularly well with Inferno Dance, especially in chain attacks, because it has a really strong power multiplier, 440% as well, allowing you to have a total power multiplier on this fusion art of 940%. And it also inflicts the Bleed debuff, which is another damage over time effect and can stack with Blaze. So if you're able to somehow get both, you can do a lot of additional damage, and this can even tick during chain attacks for a lot of additional damage, especially in later rounds. I find this to be really beneficial to allow yourself to do as much DPS as possible with the class, and it's just a really strong art in general, just for getting as much damage out of the class as possible. Pairs very well with Power Charge too. For my gem setup, I'm running Dispersed Bloodlust as mentioned earlier. This reduces your aggro generated to make sure I don't get aggro regardless of how much crazy damage I'm doing to enemies, so I think this is pretty much a really good art to run. And Powered Combo boosts all cancel damage by 75%, increasing the damage ratio of the art, which is another independent multiplier to all of my damage, allowing you to hit even harder when you cancel into attacks. It doesn't work in chain attacks, but it doesn't really matter anyway, because you'll still do plenty of damage in chain attacks, and this helps a lot outside of chain attacks to get as much damage as possible. Analyze Weakness increases the critical hit damage bonus by 70 percentage points. The more I critical hit, the more damage I deal, and I'll do over double damage every time I critical hit, which has a 42% chance with my current setup, which is pretty dang good. For my accessory setup, I am running Saturni Rings. This is the highest possible attack boost that you can have in the game, and as such is something you should definitely consider running in most situations. I think this is pretty much a no-brainer to run, especially on such a high-powered class, so you should definitely run it. Thermo Headgear increases the critical hit rate by 17 percentage points. This allows me to get a pretty high critical hit rate to allow myself to do as much critical extra damage as possible. So I think this is definitely very much worth running, especially because a lot of the added damage boost you're not going to get too much benefit out of compared to critical damage, since you already have so many sources of added damage, like damage up on launch, damage with under 85% health. So increasing your critical rate is usually going to give you more damage in most situations. Warped White Brute will ignore another 30% of enemies' physical defense, lowering it by an additional 30 percentage points, which means you'll do even more damage with all of your physical attacks, and allow yourself to hit even harder. This is a very useful accessory to have on physical classes in general. Now, if you want to go for like a max damage setup, you could replace the Thermo headgear with damage up on launch, another 110%, and just pray you actually do get a critical hit, along with replacing the aggro reduction gem and skill effects with even more damage as well, allowing you to hit some really, really crazy damage numbers, but that is very, very risky, so I'd probably just recommend sticking to a setup like this if you want to get the most benefit out of the class. I think that is going to cover it for the setup, so let's get into how to use the class practically. So I'm going to start things off with a brief hard mode Seraph here. I'm not going to chain attack at all. I'm going to show the numbers outside of a chain attack, which I think will be pretty useful as well. And I could fight it at 120, but that would require me equipping accuracy stuff, and I want to do as much damage as possible, so not going to do that. We'll just do 120 instead. That'll also make the fight a little bit faster as well. So, one good thing about this class, as I said, is once Leveling Fire is activated, you can kind of give yourself Awakening even if you don't actually take damage, which is really, really nice, because you can just allow yourself to do a bunch of additional damage without the enemy even ever targeting you, because as soon as you take that 25%, you can just go ham with damage. And right now, I do not have under to 85% health, so I'm not getting that 100% damage boost just yet. And I just gave myself Awakening there, as you might have seen on the screen. And I'm inside the circles, so I should be able to get my good arts up now. I've got my Leveling Fire stance, I have Power Charge, so I can probably do a lot of decent damage here pretty soon. So, Inferno Dance and Hidden Thorn is up. We get a Topple, I go for the Cross Impact again. And I just hit over 800,000 on one of those two hits, so not too bad at all. And then another 500,000 on a different attack. So you can see right here, this is a really nice class if you just want to get as big damage numbers as possible. Now, I was kind of saving attacks there just to show off the big damage numbers instead of spamming them as soon as they got up, which is probably going to be more beneficial in a lot of situations. But at the very least, you can kind of see just how big these numbers can get. There was an 800,000, there was a 900,000, almost a million there. And he's already at half health just from a couple big attacks. This class hits very, very, very hard, which I think is really awesome. It can hit even harder if you're not running the other stuff I'm running. That's more for safety and just higher critical hit rate. Topple and Launch, as long as you have support for that, you can do a lot of crazy damage on those two effects. So that's really nice as well. You also have a Topple art yourself if you want to access your strong damage that way, but not really a requirement. Empyrean Salvo is also doing some decent damage, as you can see, when it's in the right situation. Now, unfortunately, some of my times my healing is a little bit too good, so I can't get all the damage from that from being under 85% health. But I can keep doing as much damage to myself as I can. I probably shouldn't be standing in the healing circles, but I'm not being smart right now. I was just kind of standing where the art recharge circles were more than anything. Now I'm under 30% or under 85% health again, so I'll get all that big damage. Over 700,000 with the Talon art, and he wasn't even toppled or launched, so that was another 150% damage I could have gotten, and even more if he was launched from the extra 25% boost to all damage. And I really like this class. It's pretty fun, especially with a setup like this. I think it can be really, really fun. Now, unfortunately, no crit on either of those attacks there, so I didn't do as much damage as I would have liked. I don't know if I even had Awakening at that moment in time either, but I did give it back to myself here, so now I'm able to do more damage again. I'm kind of just waiting for Topple to try to use attacks, but you could just kind of go ham on it, because you don't really have terribly long cooldowns, at least. And you don't necessarily have to use Fusion Arts either, like I am, but you do get a bit of an increase of damage if you do, so I just like doing that because of that. So here we got a Topple. I'm going to go ahead and use my strong arts here. No crits, sadly, on any of those attacks. Otherwise, he would have probably died right there. But I just finished him off with the Talon art anyway. Not too bad. Now I'm going to show off chain attacks, since that was a pretty good showcase here. Unfortunately, this is not going to be like a damage cap, because I'd have to do extremely specific setups for that. But you can get a general idea of how useful this is. And I'm also going to be able to apply Blaze during this chain attack, and you'll be able to see just how much damage over time that can tick for with a strong hit. I think that's pretty nice. Before that point, though, I'm just kind of doing a lot of the same things here, just making sure I don't take aggro or take too much damage. And Leveling Fire keeps me kind of in Awakening range. And like I said, you can activate Awakening by yourself in chain attacks, which is really nice. Allows you to get yourself some extra damage that you wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, being able to activate your own awakening is one of the really cool things about this class for sure. You could see like over 800,000 hit there before the chain attack activated. And now we're at the launch, so we get a bunch of extra damage here. I still have awakening currently, so I just did a ton of damage there without any extra bonus effects yet. Right now, bleed is ticking. That's not blaze, and it's only 17,000 because it's the first round. But we should get some higher damage a little bit later in this attack. This is kind of the general start. If you see Ashura, you should pick her just for the big ratio boost, just for power charge and everyone if you didn't already have it. Now, one thing that, because of my kind of weird setup right now, I want to use Tyan's Order, but I don't have anyone else that can pass power charge, so I don't end up getting power charge from some of the final attacks in this chain attack, but the worm is already way past dead anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I can't show off the super high damage hits that I might have been able to hit otherwise, sadly. Now, if I'd been thinking about it, I wouldn't have run it on Tyon, but I wasn't thinking before setting this up, but oh well. Now with the increased ratio, the bleed's now doing 90k. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten a blaze effect just yet, but that shouldn't be too hard to get for long. And it hit some really high damage there. Like nearly 2 million with both of those hits, and we're not even in the later stages of the chain attack yet. The special move there hits over 1 million per hit as well. Then I go for Tyon for the damage reduction on our defense reduction to do even more damage. And I use Signifer's power charge pass as well, so I can get some extra damage this round. And I believe we finally apply Blaze here. Or no, that might be Bleed again. Okay, 148,000. Still, you can see the really powerful damage over time effect. This dragon might actually be immune to Blaze now that I think about it. It seems like the type that would be because it's a dragon. For some reason, I thought I applied Blaze in this, but maybe I did not. Regardless, the dragon's well past dead at this point, level 170. Could have shown off an even more powerful chain attack if I did the level 105 version that has less defensive stats, of course. But, oh well. You can still see the bleed damage is still ticking, and I reapplied it again there, so that's pretty nice. If I would have had the ability to power charge myself again, I probably could have hit some really massive damage numbers, but unfortunately I did not. And Awakening is gone as well, so I'm going to do some less damage here also, sadly. But I could have hit some really powerful numbers. It's not too hard to get damage cap if everything goes particularly right with this class. But he's past dead at this point, so I think that's about all you need to see. Class is very fun, hits really high damage, and probably the biggest glass cannon in the entire game. If you enjoy that type of playstyle, this is definitely a really fun class. I like doing a lot of damage myself. It's really fun to see big damage numbers, and honestly, I think this class is a pretty interesting playstyle with the dealing more damage to yourself to do more damage. So, hope you guys learned something from watching this video. I don't really have much else to say about it. And if you did, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment down below what you want to see next. There's not actually too many guides left, but I am going to make all the rest of the class guides. And I've got a couple other guides that I want to make that I'm probably waiting for the end of the class guides to make. Maybe I'll make a couple before, though. And I still want to review the game and do a couple other videos about everything, so please look forward to all of that. And as always, I'd like to thank you guys so much for watching. Please look forward to future videos, and have a wonderful and blessed day.